This is the first of a three-part series, and the Women's Foundation is really excited to present some of this information to the community, and we thank you for being here today. As we go through the presentation, we welcome your questions. Most of us, I think, are familiar now with the chat feature that Zoom offers at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat feature to submit your questions, and at the end of the panelist discussion, we'll hope to get to as many of those as we can, keeping in mind that we will keep this presentation to an hour. I know all of us have time constraints and meetings that we have after this. So if we are not able to get to some of these questions within the hour, we will do our best to put them up on our social media platforms afterwards. We also are recording this, and so for those who are interested, this will be posted on our social media platforms after today's event. And if anybody has friends who registered but something came up this morning or last night and they're not able to listen in, they will get a link to the recorded presentation as well. So feel free to please pass that along. I'd like to introduce now our three panelists. I will introduce them by name and the entity that they're affiliated with, and then they will each offer their own individual introductions of themselves. So first up, we have Rebecca Bennett, the founder and principal of Emerging Wisdom LLC and its subsidiary Empower Institute. We have Jill Farmer, coach and author of the book There's Not Enough Time and Other Lies We Tell Ourselves, and is with Jill Farmer Coaching. And as she said, she's in the international headquarters as we speak of Jill Farmer Coaching. And finally, we have Kristen Weil, the executive director of Operation Food Search. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca Bennett to allow her to introduce herself to the group.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Emily, for the introduction, and thank you to the Women's Foundation for having me here, and to my fellow panelists. It's good to see you again. So Emily told you I have a couple of enterprises. One is Emerging Wisdom. It's a consulting firm that focuses on large-scale social transformation, things that are too big for any single institution to do by itself. Does COVID ring a bell? So right now I am in the leadership of two regional response efforts to COVID. One called Prepare STL, which is really focused on making sure that we slow the spread of the virus and address the adverse social and economic impacts to those who are disproportionately impacted, specifically African Americans and our foreign-born immigrant populations and low-income individuals in the city of St. Louis and the county. The second is called the Regional Response Team, which is looking at and working on solutions for stopping the spread of the virus and addressing the adverse impacts, but in a 5-county area. So on both sides of Missouri and Illinois, and that is working with social service providers to do that. So in my work life, I get to tackle difficult problems and challenges. The one other thing that I'd like to say by way of introduction is that because I've been at this work for a quarter of a century, I recognize that the importance of community healing and healing as a part of our transformation efforts. And so the second organization that I run is called Empower Institute, and it is a center for community healing, because we don't get sustained transformation if we also don't heal what hurts. So both personally and at large scale of society and community and policy and system. So that's my introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Jill?
Thanks, Rebecca. Hi, everybody. I'm Jill Farmer, and really exciting to be part of this conversation with panelists that I think bring such a breadth of experience and knowledge from the sectors and sectors of the society of work and world that they are here to inspire us all about. And so it's a real honor to be able to join them. My work is around time and stress management for people largely within corporations. So I go into corporations and organizations, many of whom you would recognize here in St. Louis as well as nationally, to help with time and stress management by doing training, keynotes and speaking to help people be able to more sustainably do what matters to them for the long haul. And I also do some one-on-one coaching of executives and leaders. In a lot of my one-on-one coaching is centered in the healthcare sector for physicians and surgeons. My other work is in a variety of sectors, the biggest being financial services as well as healthcare, and then crossing over a variety as well, talking about time and stress management in those areas. And it's something that is very meaningful for me because it's not something that came naturally for me. My background was in TV news, and so I came from a very high pressurized career, was a young working mom, married to somebody who was also in a very highly pressurized career, and just felt that there was never enough time to do what mattered to me most in the world. And so it was through my own journey of discovery, going back to get educated and understand a little bit how our brains work, how our brains work or don't work on stress, and how we can lead and integrate what matters to us into a more meaningful existence. And I've been doing a lot of work for the last 10 years in my practice around remote working and work time flexibility. So COVID has certainly given us a fantastic disruption to allow some of the institutions that have been really resistant to looking at some of these factors to get to examine them up close and firsthand. And so I'm excited that we're going to be able to have some conversation around that today. So with that, I'll pass it on to Kristen.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.
Kristen?
Yes. Good afternoon. I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of Operation Food Search. I have always had a passion for improving the well-being of children, and my previous experience has been focused in education and advocacy settings, including Teach for America, Autism Speaks, Sylvan Learning Centers, and the Ladue Education Foundation. In my current role, I oversee the operations, programs, and initiatives of Operation Food Search, whose mission is to nourish and educate our neighbors in need to heal the hurt of hunger. Our 3 pillars include meeting the immediate need, which involves feeding more than 200,000 people every month through our network of more than 300 community partners and our out-of-school meal programs. Building nutrition IQ through cooking and nutrition classes for children and adults, and food demonstrations and grocery store tours aimed at cooking nutritious and economical meals, and championing change with our policy and advocacy department that works toward public and institutional policy changes by informing lawmakers, community leaders, and the general public about issues related to food insecurity. And this final pillar also includes our innovative programs that work beyond immediate food assistance to address the root causes of hunger. And I'm honored today to serve alongside my 2 esteemed co-panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. And before we forget, I am going to share the dates of the next 2 webinars with those that are on today. The first one is going to be July 9th, and that is going to focus on women entrepreneurs and business owners. And the third in the series is going to be on July 22nd, and that will focus on women as we come back into the workplace and what can we do to best position ourselves. As Jill said, this has been a great disruption. Great meaning a number of different things in that context, but what can women do to really position themselves to come back into the workplace stronger and better positioned than ever before. So please go ahead and put those on your calendars now. And again, just as with this webinar, we will have the information about how to sign up for that on our various social media platforms. As we dive into the questions, the first few questions are going to be posed to the entire group of panelists. The first being, and I will ask Kristen to start, what are you seeing or hearing that's happening to women in this changing work reality?
Sure. Seeing a few things. I think Women tend to wear a lot of hats and juggle a lot of responsibilities, and this has just been compounded during the pandemic. On top of everything else that women were already doing, a lot of them had to put on the hats of teacher and or caregiver. A lot of women with younger children rely upon daycare, and during the pandemic, that daycare, those arrangements have been impacted so that they've had to work from home, or their employers have required them to work from home. So they're trying to juggle their jobs and their children. I think a lot of women find it hard to focus the way they would in an office setting when they're at home and conduct online meetings without interruptions from their family or from their home lives. And then some are also caring for elderly or sick family members. So I think that puts a lot of stress on women, and really just sort of the heightened stress and fatigue of the pandemic are impacting people's work. Some have spouses who've lost a job. Some women have lost jobs themselves or have incurred a reduction in pay. Some have lost loved ones. And I think across the board, really for men and for women, the reality of living in this unpredictable world has disrupted the work routine.
And Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just want to echo what Kristen has said. Typically when we have community crises, the people who get animated and activated the most are women. So just in the nature of our public spaces, when you think about most major social crises that we experience, while there might be formal male leadership in traditional sort of positional authority ways, the people who actually do the brunt of community crisis intervention and problem solving are women. And so the stress of this particular crisis and the fact that women are largely responding, whether or not it's Kristen in her role or her work, right, or countless other women on the whole are really finding themselves bearing much of the work and the brunt of doing social problem solving, right, in the public space and in the public sphere, as well as in their private spaces, which is what Kristen articulated, because we typically have most of the responsibility for managing private life of families and communities. And so both of those things activating simultaneously, where we are the primary people who are responding and organizing around community crisis, and the people who are responsible for caregiving, and also having to bring about family stability in the midst of this, means that we are burned out. We are at our wits' end. We have a tsunami of responsibility. Our lives are crowded with demands right now. If you place that also within a larger macroeconomic story, it's interesting, NPR did a piece on what the effects of coronavirus job losses have been on unemployment. Much of us know about rising unemployment among our fellow community members. What many of us may not know is that women bear the brunt of coronavirus job losses. So as of April, 55% of job losses were incurred among women. The reason for that is because of the kind of industries where we are often most heavily represented. So if we're in service industries, if we are in sort of hotel industries or other kinds of industries that in some way provide service, those have been the industries that have been most adversely impacted by our economic shutdown. And so the result of that has been rising unemployment among women. So not only do we have these responsibilities, but we're also the most likely to lose the jobs and the economic security that we have. And there is no clear path forward in terms of a social strategy that really targets the disproportionate impact of job loss on women for us. So there is no larger social strategy about how do we get women again gainfully employed in an environment that is likely to see surges and spikes, right, around this virus. So that is to say that our economic instability will likely be prolonged beyond 2020, right, well into 2021, possibly into 2022. And that has profound implications for our well-being and the well-being of our families. So we've got the tsunami of responsibilities being crowded with purpose on the private front in terms of our families, on the public front in terms of the crisis itself, and we are being incapacitated by economic insecurity. Few thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Jill?
Yeah, thanks so much. I am not going to repeat what both Kristen and Rebecca said beautifully, which is we've got a convergence of a lot of challenging situations which can set people up, even those that didn't have the immediate impact of losing a job, for things like burnout and overwhelm. So that's the sort of the bad news. The other side of the coin from a macro perspective is that the data for a long time, the productivity data, has shown that flexibility on work hours and location makes people more productive, more loyal, healthier. And so for the first time, and that data has been out there forever, and big business and institutions and organizations have ignored it largely forever. There was always kind of the outliers who would do it, because the prevailing work ethic in our culture was still, you got to be in your butt, in your chair, in the office where the boss can count your minutes or your work doesn't count. And so from my perspective, the one big positive about this is this disruption of sort of the force situation on companies that were resistant to look at it, that remote working as a solution that benefits companies. And here's the other thing we know: remote and flexible working benefits women greatly. And the companies that refuse to integrate it into their organizations previously put an undue burden on female employees when they said, you can't come in late because the kid's got a doctor's appointment. You can't, it's just all about the number of hours in your seat. And so I have had meaningful conversations with bank presidents, with vice presidents of litigation in major corporations, with people who work in law and in medicine, who have gotten it for the first time. Oh, our output is as good or better with having people being able to work from home, people being able to manage and control their work hours a little bit better. So I would like, we know also from the data that a blended approach is better, that having some time in an office can be helpful for our psyche and our well-being, as opposed to being home full-time. And as both Rebecca and Kristen noted, home full-time often with our children, and with the expectations of us having full-time child care and teaching responsibilities for our children. So if you're feeling like you're underwater right now because you're home all the time, and I'm telling you, hey, remote working is great, you might get to be there. We know from the productivity data that a blended approach is a better way to go, where I'm not as interested about having an all or nothing where you have to be in the office or you have to be home all the time. It's you getting more autonomy as a woman, and to be able to choose when you need to be at your desk working, for you to create the meaningful output that's both expected for the job and that you know where you can be at your best. And I do think that that's a positive that is going to come out of this in many ways, because it was just too theoretical. People's patterns were too ingrained. And so it took this giant of a disruption to get people to look at it differently in many ways.
To that point, Jill, what tools, and this is again open to the group, what other tools do you think have been helpful or recommended, or maybe worthy of recommendation, when women are trying to navigate themselves through this ever-changing reality? And we'll start this time. What about Rebecca?
So I think one of the things that was common in my household growing up was life doesn't give you more than you can handle. As an adult, I have interrogated that saying quite often. And I think that the only way that works is if that second you is plural. Life doesn't give you singular more than you plural can handle. And so one of the tools that I'd like to recommend is that this is the perfect opportunity for women to circle up, right? Who is in your community? Who is in your village? Who is a part of your team? It is very important for us to have teams right now. And I don't just mean within the context of our professions, right? I mean, we have got to have people who can help us process the array of experiences that we are having, the good stuff and the painful stuff, in order to be able to move through it. Otherwise, what happens is we just keep pushing. And it turns out that we're not going to be able to easily just push our way through this, right? This is not just a moment in time. We are expecting to have the kind of social transformations and upheavals that we're currently experiencing, along with the health transformations and upheavals for a while. So we're going to really need some help, right? We're going to need to identify the people who listen to us well. Hear me, I didn't say the people who you listen to, right? The people who listen to us well. We're going to need to have community to help us process. We're going to need to articulate what we need. Now, this is a shift as a tool from what women have been conditioned to do. We typically respond to other people's articulated needs or to the needs that we see in our society, but very rarely do many of us get the kind of social, emotional space to say, I need fill in the blank. And so this is giving us a chance to develop new set of muscles here, which is to say, I need more often. That is actually a tool. I want everybody who's listening to add those 2 words to their lexicon if they don't currently have it. I need. What is it that you need, right? Otherwise, we will find ourselves managing everyone else's needs and be resentful by the fact that our needs do not get met in the process, because it is often not quid pro quo, where our needs, we take care of others' needs and then our needs get met. Often, no, we take care of others' needs and our needs don't get met. So I just want to add that is one other thing. And then the last thing I want to say about tools, and again, why circles and support is so important, is that in our workplaces, many of us are experiencing states where we are being inspected more than respected under these circumstances. Inspected first. So now that the line between our public lives and our private lives has really been erased for many of us. Right, we are managing children in the background. I don't know how many of you have this reality, but where your children come on the screen, I know mine do, right? They want to see, what am I doing all the time? Or were there other things that are happening? We feel ourselves to be inspected. I've even had colleagues tell me that their employers have said to them, your children are a distraction, right? While you're at home. This is not surprising. It is difficult, though, to bear, because we're trying to hold it all. We're trying to manage, and we're trying to manage things that are outside of our control. So we definitely need communities and circles, groups, small groups that we can be our realist with and our rawest with in order to help us navigate the uncertainty and the transformation, periods of transformation that we're in.
That's
I'm interested in what Jill and
Kristen, what about, Kristen, what are your thoughts? What tools, tips, tricks, do you think are useful, should be recommended, have been recommended, that you've seen work well in your life?
Well, I'd say, just to sort of piggyback on what Rebecca shared, I think from the perspective of, those are great tools for women who need to, advocate for themselves and make sure they express to their employers, to their bosses, what they need. And I think from the perspective of, in the role of executive director and sharing with anyone out there who is in a similar position, just, I think, being open to those ideas that Rebecca shared, allowing for flexibility with work hours and workspace. For women who are caring for, educating children at home, it's important to support a modified schedule. They might work in the evenings or on the weekends instead of their standard 8 to 5 day that they had done before. I think it's really important to keep the lines of communication open and have regular touch base meetings so women don't feel removed or disconnected from their coworkers. Remote meetings don't compare to in-person meetings, but we're fortunate to be in the year that we are. Think about the 1918 flu pandemic. They couldn't Zoom then. So I think, really taking advantage of this opportunity that we all have to stay connected, and, just really keeping our female and our male employees engaged by communicating priorities, encouraging collaboration, and recognizing achievements. I think that's something that we tend to do more when we're physically all in the same space together. But when we're separated, we still need to make sure that we're recognizing people, individually and across the entire organization.
Thank you, Kristen. You brought up a good point. We're talking, of course, today about the impact of COVID on women, but what to the group, I ask, what do you think is making this impact so unique to women? Rebecca, you touched on it a little bit earlier when you were going through some of the statistics, but it is affecting women differently. And why do we think that is? What are those changes that women are experiencing that are so different or unique from men? And Jill, I'll ask you to start this one.
Great. I'll answer that, and then I also will talk a little bit about tools. Even though I know there's a whole toolbox full of great information that the other brilliant panelists shared, I want to add to that toolbox as well. The thing that makes this unique is it goes back to something that social psychologists have just started naming in the last 5 years, and Rebecca alluded to it in her first answer, and that's what they're calling the invisible workload of women, right? We got to this point where all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, men are starting to do more of the housework and more duties, and we're sharing more parenting responsibilities, which is great. But then social scientists said, yeah, but then there's still that kind of decision-making stuff that still is, when our research is showing, is still falling largely on women. Women are still the ones that decide who's going to break up the chores and what chores need to get done and what presents need to be bought and what camp needs to go to, even if somebody else is helping with the driving in that process. So the invisible workload of women is being identified and named, and enough women have kind of reached this place where they're at capacity that I think we're having more open and honest conversations about it, and we're naming that for each other. So I think that's part of the differentiation in the difference between men and women. There just is, there's a great book, by the way, called Mommy Burnout, which takes a look at a psychologist based in Denver that looks at a lot of these factors. And I think it's helpful to help us understand some of it. We have to take ownership for. We can be perfectionists. Women who are between the ages of 25 and 60 definitely parent with a more perfectionistic style than previous generations, which has made, I think, improvements for our children in some ways. And on the other hand, it's when we're bearing the entire responsibility for that, that's creates more stress. The other question about what tools do we have that are being helpful or recommended also, I think, piggyback well on what Kristen and Rebecca talked about. We have those normal things of the invisible workload of women and perfectionism and things that can make life challenging. And then we have what I've been describing as these apps draining our batteries, running in the background constantly, which include COVID and the call for major social change that's impacting so many different areas of our lives. And those apps are running, draining our batteries right now, creating a lot of uncertainty, as Rebecca touched on, economic uncertainty for a lot of people, which means that both collectively and individually, a lot of us are working with in an activated stress state. When we're in an activated stress state for long periods of time, it burns us the hell out. Burnout is an issue that was finally named in 2019 by the World Health Organization as a bona fide health issue. It's not just something that people kind of banty around. And we do know that there are things that can help treat it and prevent it, which include Rebecca's #1 tool, which is community, naming your needs and being in community, some form of presence, if there's no time for mindfulness and meditation, learning to slow your breath down and be in the present moment is a way that you quiet an activated stress state, which is going to definitely help tamp down some of that stress level that we know is terrible for our health and for long-term ability to keep doing what it is that we're doing in life, both at work, at home. And then also good old-fashioned exercise. And I know nobody can go to the gym or has time to do, a giant perfect workout. And it's the last time we feel like what we can do when we're sometimes stressed out. But the new data, the brain science on this is we can't ignore. Nothing metabolizes stress hormones in our body better than moving our bodies. I'm a couch potato by nature. I really wish I had different news for you there, because I would sure prefer to just rid myself of all stress by watching Netflix. That would really work out, or reading a whole bunch of good books. And I just have to do it while I'm, walking or doing something else at the same time. But I really think I'd be remiss when we're talking about tools and just ignoring the fact that even for trauma recovery and adverse childhood effects, we know that exertion and in moving your body can have a healing effect on those impacts. And so I think it's a tool that we need to be making space for, and we need to be asking others in our life to help us make space for, so that we can get through this without being burned out and feeling like we're hopeless and we don't have a way to move forward.
Hey, Emily, can I take a moment to build on what Jill said? I know we have some other questions, but I really want to lean in for a moment.
Oh, please.
I want to say that what Jill has named around the importance of presence cannot be overstated. Now, here's the thing. We exist in a context, in a society that often has us make a choice that presents as a conflict two things: presence and productivity. So many of us feel the conflict between presence and productivity, right? The more present I am, the less productive I am. Right? The more time I spend on myself with my kids doing something else, then that means I'm not productive. So I want to name that conflict, because that conflict is not one that we have created. It is one that we have inherited. So when we live in a society or in economies that really in many ways treat human talent as a commodity, where we identify talent, extract talent, right? Discard talent at times once it's no longer useful. Part of that tension lands on us. It's important to name that. It lands on us and it lives in us. So we are often feeling conflicted between presence and productivity, which is one of the reasons why we need community. Because it's very hard to do something different, to go against that sort of maladaptive conditioning on our own. We actually need other people who are making or trying to make similar kinds of choices around being more present to reinforce that behavior for us, because what is socially valued is productivity, not presence. So if we fall short, it's not because it's a lack of character on our part, it's because the larger social reinforcement doesn't value and balance, doesn't weigh in the favor of presence. I also want to say around that, Jill talked about perfectionism. And I want to name, like we're in this moment around racial conflict and conflagration and strife and the importance of naming racism. So in this space, I want to name patriarchy. That's right, I said it. Patriarchy. Because what happens, the nature of all oppressions, is that those who are targeted by the oppressions internalize them at some point. We internalize them in order to be able to survive. So perfectionism is actually a creation of patriarchy in many ways. Why? Why am I saying that? Because part of the challenge for women, you heard me say earlier on, is that we often feel inspected before respected. There's a reason why we then tend to be even more perfectionists, right? Is because we're often feeling very judged. And it's not just that we're feeling judged, we often are judged more harshly, right? As executives, we are often judged in ways that aren't necessarily fair. As parents, as community folks, right? We find that in a larger system that does not celebrate and recognize or equally weight the value and virtue of women, if we find ourselves being inspected and being judged harshly, and that is often also socially reinforced. So if we look at our larger culture, there are ways in which women's bodies and women's work gets inspected, interrogated, and examined on a regular basis. And our coping mechanism and response is perfectionism, right? So we again need community to help us, right, do something that is radically different than what it is that we have often been raised and conditioned to do. And it's too hard to do that work alone.
I just want to follow up with one quick thing. All perfect and brilliant, and I had to mute myself or I would have interrupted you with yes. And and all the way through. Another thing that comes that we have to name in terms of those gender differences, I think that comes from the patriarchy as well, is that whole idea of counting minutes in the chair and you're not doing work unless I can see you. We know from, there's some good research out there that men leaders tend to be less trusting, assuming somehow that women aren't able or capable of doing as much work. And of course, we know that data exists around color as well. And so that when we feel like we've got to be working harder and that we're being looked at more carefully in order to sort of transactionalize and commoditize what it is we're producing, it's true. And women leaders, I know we're going to be talking about that. There's going to be conversations about that in future of these. You have got to be the people who begin to turn the tide by looking at outcome and results-based tracking of meaningful work, as opposed to commoditizing minutes and hours in the chair. Because those two things are not, we know that people in other countries and people with workplace flexibility are producing more than people that are sitting in the chair in the office that they've spent twice as much time because of commuter time to get there are doing. But we are still pretending somehow that it's the better way of doing things. And I want to call on all the women leaders that are here to begin to recognize that we are going to speak some truth to power here and say, just because that's the way it's always been done, and most conveniently for the guys who made those rules, we can do this differently.
Okay, my sound dropped. I'm hoping that you guys can hear me.
We can.
You can. Okay, good. I'm sorry about that. Thanks, Jill. One thing I did want to mention, and some of our listeners today mentioned this as well. Another really excellent book is Drop the Ball by Tiffany Dufu. And we had Tiffany come speak at the Making a Difference dinner last year. And one thing that she said, the book is fantastic, but one thing I would want to add, she said, you know, we have made these excellent strides, not perfect, but certainly making strides of bringing women into the workplace. We have not made equal strides bringing men back to the home workplace. So women are going forward and being asked now to do even more than they've ever done. And we're not yet seeing some of that reciprocity where men are doing some of the housework or the equivalent housework as women are doing in their professional field. But someone else mentioned it, and so I thought I would share that title that is Drop the Ball. Okay, for our next question, this is going to be specific to Kristen. And that is, all of us know and are aware of the economic losses that are happening, which include job loss, food insecurity, and the like. How can women take care of their basic needs of their families right now? What other tools are out there in that area?
Sure, I guess my answer will be focused primarily on the issue of food insecurity, given my position. There are a lot of resources out there for families who are facing food insecurity. If people have school-aged children, they can access free meals for their children at a lot of community locations and schools. We actually have on our website, which is www.operationfoodsearch.org, we have a child meal map that lists more than 600 sites where families can get free meals. We also have people can find a food pantry by using our online map on our website or calling or texting our hunger hotline. Additionally, we have other resources on our website, such as our Stock Up for Summer brochure, which provides tips for stretching food dollars and stocking up pantries. It includes recipes. It also includes information about emergency pandemic electronic benefit transfer. So if families have children who qualify for free or reduced price lunches and breakfast at school, they can be reimbursed up to $302. And there's information, and that actually, some families automatically qualify, others have to actually apply. The deadline was just extended from June 30th to July 7th. But so far, only about 61% of Missouri families have taken advantage of that, those who qualify. So we're trying to get the word out about that. We also have on our website a family food finder, which has been translated into 6 languages It provides information about expanded SNAP or food stamp benefits, WIC benefits, food locations, stimulus checks, and other resources. And really, I think importantly, I think women need to recognize that they're not alone. We've talked a lot about community, and St. Louis, where there are certainly some shortcomings, St. Louis is an incredibly philanthropic city. And there's just a myriad of amazing nonprofits that provide help, whether it's related to food insecurity, housing, legal assistance, getting baby supplies, school supplies, the list goes on and on. So I think definitely taking advantage of the resources that our town has and all the organizations that are out there to help women.
Emily, we may have lost you.
Thank you, Kristen.
There you are.
Go ahead, Jill.
We lost you for just a second, but we just heard the last part of what you said. So sorry I interrupted.
Okay. The next question is going to be to Jill, and it's touched on some things that you've already spoken to in this time period. It is your book, and that's titled "There's Not Enough Time and Other Lies We Tell Ourselves" is important now more than ever, as women are acting as caregivers, teachers, employees, etc. What advice can you share with women who are feeling overwhelmed in this moment?
Well, give yourself a break and don't make yourself go read another book if that feels overwhelming. I'm going to summarize a few points and then call it good, man. Do not put that pressure on yourself. I know a lot of us are trying. I mean, there's really good books to read. I would choose one on anti-racism as a priority, even over time management now. But I'm going to give you some highlights so you can skip this this reading of stuff. A couple of things that I think can be really helpful is again to notice in that presence versus productivity. I would change it and say that the only way we can be meaningfully productive is to be present with what actually needs to be done, and not what that programming is in our brains about what we should be doing, right? I'm borrowing, I use this in my book, and it's a borrowed phrase from 12-step programs, but we're really good at shoulding all over ourselves as opposed to listening to what I think of as that quiet voice of wisdom within to help prioritize. Again, we're so used to, and it's not because we're doing anything wrong, but we were ingrained from a very early age. We were indoctrinated that scaring ourselves into not having enough is the way to launch or be a catalyst for productivity. And the brain science shows us the opposite, that when we're in an activated brain, an activated stress state, we lose 13 IQ points, right? Which is why that this was research that was done at Harvard a few years ago, which is why people that are in food insecurity and economic insecurity sometimes don't make the best decisions. It's not because they're not as smart, it's because their brain is losing 13 IQ points when we are in an activated stress state. So if you can work on not letting "there's not enough time" be the catalyst for launching and making action and making decisions, you will go a long way toward being able to make better decisions about priorities and efficiency for those of you that have the ability to do that. A couple of other quick things that I just really like to share whenever I have a chance to talk about time and stress management. That there's women struggle a lot more sometimes with contaminated time. What social scientists and time management experts will talk about as contaminated time. And that means when we're doing work stuff, we're still having to think about kid stuff. When we're doing kid stuff, we're still having to do work stuff. And we know from productivity research that when we can provide some containers of uncontaminated time, we can actually get stuff done far more quickly than when we try to juggle those two things at once. And the same is true for multitasking. Anybody who's ever heard me talk before, I'm repeating this and I'm going to keep repeating it for 1,000 times. There is no such thing as multitasking. The brain can only switch between tasks. And so when you're trying to do a whole bunch of things at once and convincing yourself it's going to increase your productivity, it is increasing your stress. It is increasing the amount of time it takes you to do those things. We know from the data that if you're multitasking between 3 things, that you're more than doubling the time that it would take you if you individually did each of those 3 things. And you are actually lowering your efficacy as well. Research that was done in London a number of years ago showed us that people that are multitasking have about the same cognitive focus as somebody who's stoned. So it's, you know, not, I didn't make it up, but the data is certainly there. So I just really want to invite people to create, when possible, some containers for yourself instead of trying to pretend that you can do it all and do it all at once, of focused, present time. And let's all help me abolish the belief that multitasking is anything but harmful, because it really doesn't work.
The last question for the panelists, for individual panelists, excuse me, is going to be for Rebecca. And that would be, how would you advise, or what advice would you have for women to best maintain their mental and physical well-being given the current climate? What outlets or tools, and we've kind of covered this, but to the extent that it helps you in answering your question, what outlets or tools would you advise for women to use in this time?
Thank you. I'm glad that that's the last question, because it gives me an opportunity to take everything we've been talking about already and to give it back one more time. We know it takes multiple exposures to a message to really take it in. So what advice do I have? 1, time tied to yourself, right? That's that presence, but it makes no difference. You know, it's no good to be present to everything else but yourself. Right? I'm present to and for and with everything but myself. I'm absent unto myself. So to the extent that we can, that we are able to create a container around our own tithing to self, right? Where we notice ourselves, we pay attention to ourselves, right? We monitor what is happening, right? How am I feeling? Am I upset? Am I happy? Am I tired? Am I, right? Sometimes we're moving so fast and so much that we have a whole host of things that are going on, but our attention is externally oriented. And so there are lots of stressors that you've heard Jill talk about, lots of stressors that are coming together and operating within us. But this is an opportunity for us to notice, to take some time to just notice ourselves, right? So when I say time tied, notice ourselves. And whether or not that's 5 minutes or 20 minutes, I can't tell you. But if you can, when you can, as a daily practice, notice yourself. Now, the formal term for that, of course, is mindfulness, right? Where we can be mindful of what is happening in us and around us. But if mindfulness feels too big for you, just notice yourself, right? The second thing that I would say is that as a part of that noticing, one of the things that we will uncover is more of what is happening in our interior landscape. And I want to talk about that because COVID and so many other things have us focusing on our exterior landscape, right? But if we are able to pay attention to ourselves, chances are, and particularly our pain points, chances are that we're going to notice some patterns or some dynamics in our lives that actually need healing. And they probably weren't caused by this crisis, though they have been amplified by it. So that means that, you know, if we pay attention, we'll find things that we probably shouldn't run away from. And in those things, it is useful to get some other help. So to the extent that we are open to therapy and counseling and all those things, I'm a big fan of getting professional help and support in that process. But I also believe in community support, right? We've all got ears. And so to the extent that there are people who genuinely care about us and will listen to us, that's important, particularly as we uncover those patterns and dynamics that are really being amplified in this moment. So to get us out of philosophy and down to brass tacks, I'll give you 2 of mine. One is I trash myself to get the job done. That probably is not unique to me. I have a business. I have 9 people that work for me, right? I'm all over the place. I have a pattern of trashing myself to get the job done. That is to say, I'm so out of balance with regard to the productivity and the not being as present often. The consequence of that was lots of consequences of that. That's a different conversation. right? But that is a pattern, and that pattern got amplified in this crisis. It began before this crisis, but it got even more amplified, right? A second pattern for me that I'm often hearing from lots of women, particularly now that we have kids at home, and I have two young ones. I got a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm almost 50, so y'all figure that one out, right? But I have this second pattern is I'm here but not available, right? How many of us as women have felt that way? With the children, it's like, yes, I'm here, but I'm really not available because I've got to do all of these other things, right? So we are feeling a fundamental conflict in that, what feels like a fundamental conflict there. It's a pattern of distress. The I'm here but not available. And it doesn't stop with our children. I'm here but not available to my health. I'm here but not available to fill it in, right? So that again is not something that was only created by COVID, but it certainly has gotten amplified by it. So this is the perfect opportunity to do the work to heal the patterns and to get some assistance in being able to address and resolve these patterns that are operating not only on us, but in and through us, right? It becomes important to do that. We need to get help. We also should be getting grounded in nature, right? Like we really need those things that really help us manage all of the stress hormones and all of the things that we are experiencing. Nature, it turns out, is an excellent vitamin. Not only because of vitamin D, but it turns out how our cells are receptive to our environment, right? So getting grounded is really good. Figuring out and paying attention to what is it that feeds me in my life? If it's your faith, if it's your relationships, actually give more attention to the things that feed you, because when you are well fed and nourished, your ability to be healthy and thriving increases, and your ability to be effective, productive also increases. So if we can tie more attention to what is it that feeds and resources us, that's also another thing. The last thing that I will say here is it's really important, like I'm sure Jill and others often in their trainings to leaders and executives, often we talk about the importance of delegating. This in many ways is a new skill and needs to be an increased skill of women because often we are the ones who are delegated to. But the opportunity for us in this moment, as we have mates and partners and other people, many of us who are also having to be at home, is to be like, I can't do that. Who else can I get? Right? Who else can I get in our workplaces? If there are others that we can delegate to, and in our home lives, right? But this is a part of articulating the I need. Because in the absence of doing that, what we will find again is that we are crowded with responsibility and that we are holding it all. And then we certainly get drained and depleted by that. This is also the last thing I will say is an opportunity to enforce and articulate. Let me start with articulate, to articulate and to enforce our boundaries, right? We can't get out of that if we want to be well. So our ability to contain. Jill used the language of container, but there's no way to create containers without being clear about what the boundaries and borders are. And so spending some time, figuring out what they are and articulating them, because oftentimes we'll notice them, but we won't say anything about them. So, and getting support in articulating our boundaries. This is okay, this is not okay, right? This is what I can do, this is beyond what I am capable of or prepared to do. Like these are really good skills that are great not only in dealing with crisis, but they're great in dealing with life.
Yes.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I'm gonna ask each of the panelists for my next question, give like your 10-second response, then we're gonna shift over to Q&A. We've got some good questions that I think the panelists would be interested in responding to. So my question for the whole group is for, like I said, your quick fire response. What are the silver linings or signs of progress or hope that are coming out of this pandemic? Jill, we'll start with you.
Just to reiterate what I said in the beginning, I really think that the disruption is showing leadership at the very top levels of some of the biggest power structure organizations in our world that remote and flexibility and autonomy over schedule and work location can be blended in, which gives people freedom takes away commutes and gives them support to be able to balance work and home life better.
Kristen?
Sure. I think one of the silver linings has been that the pandemic has brought together a lot of organizations. It's inspired, especially in the nonprofit sector, for organizations to collaborate more than ever. I know Rebecca serves on the regional response team. Operation Food Search is one of 150 organizations that's involved with that team, which is really committed. It was initially assembled to respond to the pandemic. Now it's pivoting to focus more on addressing racial inequality. And I've just seen so many collaborations time and time again over the last 3 months. And I think that that's going to continue beyond the pandemic. I think it will really benefit our community.
Rebecca?
Well, two things. One is that the conflagration of crises right now is creating more openings for women's leadership. So again, a deep bow to the Women's Foundation and to my fellow women panelists and to all of the women who are on this call or beyond who are doing extraordinary work in extraordinary ways. This is one of these moments where all hands on deck is what we need. And we can't afford to not have women lead, right, in this time period. The consequence to us is too great, right? We need the best talent, best intelligence, best presence, right? We need as much as we possibly can get in order to be able to survive, right, much less thrive. And so the opening for women's leadership is pronounced, I believe, in this moment as I'm working with a number of great women leaders. The other thing that I will say that's great about this moment is that we're ripping the Band-Aids off of our oppressive systems and structures because it is time for them to die, right, to atrophy and to die. And whether or not those systems are really deep institutional or structural investment in racism or in patriarchy, right, these crises at these moments are challenging the old ways of doing things or the normal ways of doing things, which quite honestly are painful and maladaptive. So we're being called to evolve our social systems, our social structures, and our social conditioning about who and what we are and what we are capable of as collectives, as groups within collectives called women, and as individuals.
Thank you, guys. One question, this was one of our early questions that we got, but I think it does speak to probably what a number of different people are wondering about. So Jill, I'm going to start this off with you, but I think Kristen, Rebecca, you'll probably have thoughts on it too. And I know we only have about 3 minutes left, but there's actually came about with how do you balance the desire for flexibility in your time and how your employees work with staff who have not yet developed the skill sets to manage their own work. So whether or not that, speaks to if you have a younger staff or just somebody new to the organization who isn't yet familiar with the ways of balancing, a number of different moving parts. So Jill, I'll start with you.
Very, very briefly, you increase your ability as a leader to trust in the people that you have hired, I think, and you, number two, get creative and think outside the box on ways that you can train meaningfully in real-time situations to allow people to make mistakes and to give meaningful feedback as a positive way for them to understand that this is a good learning laboratory for them, as opposed to a place where there's that you're either doing it right or you're doing it wrong, you're in trouble or you're not in trouble. As leaders, I think we have to really expand our capacity to be trustworthy, or to be trusting and flexible and creative in the ways that we train through imperfection and things not going as planned.
I would also suggest that this is a great opportunity to delegate too. So sometimes when we are in the developmental phase where we are learning basic competencies and capacities, people do need higher touch, right? We need to be more trusting, but people may also need higher touch. The question is, does that higher touch have to come from you? Are there other people on your team with mastery or proficiency around those competencies and capacities who could serve as either peer support and or managerial support so that they are participating in that person's development and learning, but it is not requiring you to be the person that has all of the touch points around that?
Site, I think just having regular touch base meetings where you can learn, okay, where does someone need support? Where are they not able to thrive in the job that they're in? And I agree with Rebecca as far as having a mentor, having a peer, you know, a more veteran or seasoned employee who can maybe help that newer employee manage their time.
Thanks, Kristen. Okay, we are at exactly 1 o'clock. So there are a couple questions that we're not going to be able to get to, but we will put those up on social media and see if we can pick the panelist brain just a little bit offline and get some of those posted on the Women's Foundation social media pages. I do want to remind everybody that this is, again, the first of 3 webinars that we'll be doing. So the second one is going to be on July 9th. And that, like I said, focuses on women entrepreneurs and women bosses, girl bosses, addressing change. And then July 22nd, really focusing on women returning to the workforce. If you want to get more information about the Women's Foundation, there are a few more excellent events that you can become a part of. The first is August 13th of this year, and that is Changing Public Policy, Economic Success for Women Awards Ceremony. And then the second big event where you can learn more about the Women's Foundation is our Making a Difference dinner, and that's going to be on September 24th. It's at the Ritz-Carlton. There we will honor Lorna Goodwin, and we will have panelists somewhat similar to the setup that we have here. Carolyn Kindle Betts and Allie Kindle Hogan, both well-known names in the St. Louis community, and our moderator there will be Carol Daniel. And then finally, if you want to learn more online or otherwise donate to the Women's Foundation, we are, as you might imagine, well established on our webpage, and there are links on the webpage where you can donate or find out more about donating, about becoming involved with the Women's Foundation, about our upcoming events. And so that is the information, the contact information, if you would like to do some of that. The email at the bottom obviously is a good one-stop shop if you just have one-off questions or want to make a donation of any kind. You can certainly find out more by info@wfstl.org. So with that, thank you all again for participating today. Thank you so much to our fantastic panelists. Thanks to Lathrop GPM, which is the law firm where I practice, for hosting today's webinar, and we can't wait to see everybody on July 9th. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.